Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm pissed. I am royally pissed.
Get those pants.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're going to talk about some breaking news, some controversial breaking news actually coming out of CGC today, where they announced that they're going to be changing the parameters for their defects that are listed on their labels. So in this video, we're going to go over the news, we're going to read through the article, talk about some of the stuff, and then I'm going to weigh in on why I don't think these changes are going to be a good thing for comic book collectors. But of course, before I get into the article, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, all those things, yada, yada, yada. But let us get into this breaking news because this is really important to talk about. So let's just kind of go through this article that came out today, earlier this morning. And the title of the article is this on CGC's website: parameters modified for defects listed on CGC labels. So let's go through the article and we'll kind of break it down. So because CGC members now have free access to graders notes, not as many defects will be listed on the certification label. Based on feedback by prominent members of the comic collecting community, Certified Guaranteed Company is implementing a change that will reduce the number of defects that are identified on the comic book label. So just in case you guys are unfamiliar with what they're talking about, of course, I have a book right here. This is a CGC book on the CGC label. Sometimes you'll notice that underneath the title of the book right here, they will often have these little footnotes that say tape on cover, or they might have a footnote that says cover is detached, or they might have a footnote that says, spine is split. So they're announcing in this article that they're going to be removing a lot of those defects on those labels, but let's carry on. I just wanted to make sure you guys understood what we were talking about here. So traditionally, certain defects were listed on the CGC label if they were present on a certified comic book, which were also recorded in the comic book's graders notes. Because CGC members now have free access to graders notes, this redundancy is being eliminated from the label for the presence of the following defects. All right, so let's go through these defects and see what they're deciding to remove. Stickers, Siamese pages, punched holes, staples added after manufacturing, staples removed, detachments. We're gonna talk about detachments very specifically soon. Fully split spine, another one we need to talk about. Tape, significant missing parts from the cover, lamination, miscuts, puzzles, or coupons filled out. All right, so let's talk about this first because there's a few things that we need to kind of break down. So let me extend an olive branch to the other side of the discussion right here with CGC. They're saying that they want to remove some defects on the labels like stickers or punched holes or staples removed and things like that. And let me offer them this. I can understand in the most charitable definition of this that they want to kind of reduce some of the redundancy. So for instance, I took this book right here, X-Men #4, and my little defect on this one says tape on cover. So now if you look at the upper left corner, you will actually see that that is where the tape is. It is right there on the cover, on the very, very top. It kind of wraps around near Cyclops' head. There you can see on the back very clearly that the tape is right there. So does CGC really need to put on the label that there's tape on the cover when I myself can very clearly see it? So again, going back to this article here, I can understand, the argument to be made that, CGC kind of wants to clean up their label. They don't want to point out a sticker or whatever the case is, or like a punched hole, because those are defects that we can, as collectors, identify when we are holding the book. But then we get to things like this, where we talk about detachments. And detachments is something that I think, very clearly should be identified on comic book labels. I mean, I think detachments, in my opinion, are almost some of the most noteworthy things I think any comic book collector wants to know about their book. And especially when we have it encased in a CGC label, when we're talking about detachments of cover, or we're talking about detachments of, centerfolds and things like that, it's really important to know that stuff because I think detachments bother a lot of people. And so I wanted to actually pull up this book right here. Like, imagine you're somebody out there who's looking to buy this X-Men #4. You see that it's a CGC 2.0 grade. And generally speaking, the book, presents pretty well here in this case. But, thankfully, it actually has that little footnote at the top right there that says cover detached. So I, as a buyer know what I'm signing up for, know what I'm opting into when I purchase this book. That's really important to point that out so that we are aware of what we are actually buying. Similarly here, look at this book. Here's an X-Men #2 that has a detached centerfold. Now, of course, you would maybe be able to find that out if you were looking up online, like in the registry, but it's really helpful to know that when you look at the CGC label right there, you can see that it says centerfold detached, because I think there are collectors out there that would prefer, not to have a book with some of these detachments. And it's really, really, helpful and nice that we have these labels to kind of show us what potentially could be missing from the book. Now, here's the interesting part about this conversation. Once it's in the label, do you actually care if, say, the centerfold is detached? And I think the argument from probably a lot of, respected members in the community, or however CGC put it, is that, they don't want to have their books with these sort of scarlet letters, so to speak, meaning like when they have these labels that has like tape on cover or staple detached or centerfold detached, obviously that's going to hurt their ability to move this book or to sell this book, because naturally there's going to be a bias against that book compared to another book that is the same exact grade that doesn't have those labels. So I think I can understand where, from a seller's perspective, they're really happy about these changes because they want to be moving these books. But again, I think it's really important to have this information out there. And I know that CGC's argument is going to be that, oh, you can always look it up on the website, or you can always look at the grader's notes, so all that information is going to be there for you anyways. But you guys know we've all bought books at shows or in person, and you don't always have time and the ability to sort of look up all of the defects in the grader's notes, and it's really helpful to have these footnotes. But let's jump back into this article and let's just kind of finish it out, because there's another part here that I think is actually even more egregious in my opinion. So we have all these things that they're going to be removing. CGC will continue to identify on the label any significant missing pieces, pages, wraps, or inserts from the interior of the comic book. So I think, again, their logic is that, if you can see it on the outside, we don't need to label it. But if there's something on the inside, presumably they want to make a statement about it. Each comic book's grade will reflect all missing parts, and those missing parts will be recorded in the grader's notes. Now, here is where I just cannot believe that this is actually a part of their changes. I can almost understand the argument for every other thing that we've talked about already, but this one right here to me is pretty egregious. CGC is discontinuing the use of the term incomplete on its label, as well as the terms affect story and does not affect story when parts are missing from the interior of the comic book. I mean, that right there to me is actually crazy. So in case you guys don't know what we're talking about here, oftentimes you get these sort of qualified grades, or you get the 0.5 thing here, and you'll see at the label, it'll say pieces cut out of page 12 does not affect story, spine of cover completely split and reattached with tape, incomplete. So it'll actually say, hey, somewhere in this book, there's been a piece that has been cut out, but it's actually on an ad page, so it doesn't affect the story. But technically speaking, this book is complete. That's why it is a 0.5 grade there. Here, on the other hand, you have piece cut out of page 10, affects story, incomplete. So you can actually say, oh, somewhere in this book, there was a panel cut out. And so presumably, if you're someone who actually wanted to read this book, you would not be able to do so. And this book is incomplete. And I think that those distinctions and those qualifiers are really important for the CGC labels, because why wouldn't you want to know those things about the book that you're buying? I mean, more information is better than less information. And especially if we're talking about, a panel being cut out, and if it affects the story or doesn't affect the story, or a page is missing that does or doesn't affect the story, I don't know why these things are not being highlighted, or why they don't want to continue to highlight them, because I think that they're really helpful. In fact, I think that there are a lot of comic book collectors that don't mind purchasing qualified books as long as they don't affect the story. Someone is not really concerned if an ad page or a coupon, for some kind of mail toy was cut out of a comic book, because they themselves still know that the, integrity of the comic book overall is still there for them to enjoy. So I really don't understand why CGC would be removing this stuff other than to just sort of support, a lot of people out there in the community, or the sellers or the dealers who want to be able to sell some of those books that effectively have been given these sort of scarlet letters in terms of being branded as incomplete. Because admittedly, I mean, when you have a book that is incomplete or it has some of those things where it's like, oh, a thing is cut out, it feels really bad, right? So I can only imagine that, the values of those books have been drastically taken down due to the fact that they are incomplete. In fact, there's a lot of cases where, an incomplete book would probably be better off just being cracked out of the CGC case and being sold raw, because I think people would pay for a raw, like nice presenting book more so than say like a 0.5 book that has that scarlet letter on it. And I think that, deep down, this is probably one of those factors that weigh into this decision, is that, CGC wants people to be purchasing their graded books. They don't want to have a subsection of their books, like say the 0.5 stuff that are incomplete, that effectively devalues the book anytime it is encapsulated. So this is something that actually goes against what CGC benefits from. So it's really interesting to think about that overall. And then the last little thing we need to talk about in this article is that the CGC label will continue to display restoration, conservation, and qualifiers as we have in the past, including married parts, color copies, wrong parts, covers, comics, individual wraps and pages, multiple covers, additional inserts, and unverified signatures to the cover. Now, this is a little different part of the conversation, but I do want to kind of talk about this because I think that married pages is the most like overrated defect there is in CGC comics. I actually don't really understand what the problem with married pages is and why they are actually given qualified grades versus restoration ones. I mean, I feel like having a married cover or a married centerfold or a married whatever page or whatever the case may be is actually a interesting little aspect to the restoration process of comic books. In fact, I wouldn't mind having my book be restored via like a married page versus say just not having that page in the book. Now, I actually don't think that that should sort of be viewed as sort of a qualified type of thing or something that, is kind of shunned in that sense. I actually think married pages are not a bad way to kind of preserve a lot of the stuff out there in the market and the comic books that are deteriorating rapidly. Additionally, I think the unverified signatures on the cover is really, really stupid. I actually do think that, if you have a signature that clearly looks like Stan Lee's signature and then to give it a green label is kind of stupid. I mean, I feel like, how many times do you guys know that there's been books that are like, some random person in the 60s, some kid wrote their name on it, like, Mickey or whatever, and that gets the blue label. I mean, why don't we treat it as the same way with a signature of like an artist or a writer who clearly signed the book? I mean, if anything, just don't give it the gold label, obviously, just give it the blue label, right? So it has what appears to be Stan Lee's signature on it. Just give it the blue label and then someone can, decide if they feel like purchasing that book or not. But that's neither here or there. The main part of this news is the fact that CGC is changing these defects on their labels. They're going to be, pulling back a lot of the parameters of what they, put out there on the labels. And to me, in my opinion, I think that that is a bad thing for the hobby overall. I mean, more information is better than less information. I do understand if there's an argument that, you don't always need to point out these flaws that may make people look at a book in sort of a negative way. For instance, I have my one of my favorite books here, Avengers #1, and actually on the top of it, it says one piece of tape on interior of cover. Sorry if you can't get the focus right there, but it says up there, one piece of tape on interior of cover. And so for me, it's kind of like, well, did I really need to know that there was a piece of tape on the interior of the cover? Not really. I mean, does it bother me that it actually says that up there? Yeah, it kind of does bother me. I'd rather they just didn't have it, and kind of ignorance is bliss in that situation. But the problem with that is that if you don't have sort of these hard set rules, then you kind of overlook one type of defect in lieu of another type of defect. Eventually, you're going to have defects that do matter that get kind of like overlooked. And this is why I think you have to have strict parameters so that comic book collectors can just know what they're getting. Again, CGC is going to argue that you can just look up the book online, that you can just check the grader's notes. But ultimately, to me, I mean, a lot of people are not going to always be able to do that, especially if you're buying a book at a show. We've all been in those shows where, our cell phone service is not working. So in those situations, it makes it really hard to check those grader's notes. So, to me, it was always a benefit that the label would have these little footnotes on them. And I think it's a disappointment if they decide to remove them. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. That was me just kind of sharing what is going on with CGC. Let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about this news? Are you guys happy about this? I mean, are you on the side where you think that, it's actually better to not sort of give these books these scarlet letters? Or do you think that this information is important so that buyers know what they're getting? Let me know in the comments, drop me a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.